Hey everybody, so I'm in the process of rereading the book Irreversible Damage by Abigail Shrier right now. The book is basically about how gender transition among adolescents is extremely problematic and harmful to them. It causes irreversible damage. I'm reading the book obviously for work. I'm going to be talking about it for a while in an upcoming video, so I'm not going to, go through the whole thing right now. There is one section of the book that's too small and too meaningless for me to talk about in the video, and so I just wanted to share it here. So in one section of the book, Shrier starts talking about how education is encouraging all this trans stuff, how they're trying to teach all these LGBTQ stuff to kids, and I want to read it to you. It's a really short section. I want to go through it bit by bit. She writes, "There have always been women who broke barriers and inhabited male roles, behaviors that would today be sufficient to deem them gender non-conforming. Joan of Arc, Catherine the Great, George Eliot, George Sand, and Sally Ride. But none of these women thought she was less of a woman for having taken on traditionally male roles. None insisted that she was really a man. They might be surprised to learn that this is precisely how school children across the country are increasingly being taught to see them. On the female side of the spectrum, perhaps, but not entirely female, a little more to the male side, or somewhere in between." Okay, who does she mean? What person is she talking about? Who's been taught about this way? As somewhere in between. She's a footnote there. You can see that there's a footnote. Maybe there's some evidence for this claim. So you follow the footnote and we find an article from the American Spectator called American History LGBTQ Edition. I'm not going to read this whole article to you right now, but I will tell you right now, it doesn't say whatever she said it did. She's not using citations properly because there's not a single example of a historical woman who's being taught as somewhere in between on the gender spectrum. It's an article about how Illinois is enforcing LGBTQ education on American schools. It doesn't talk about all the women that are being masculinized. It's not in there. Okay, let's go on then. California, New Jersey, Colorado, and Illinois all have laws mandating LGBTQ history be taught in schools. As a practical matter, this has meant rewriting social studies textbooks and curricula to out the likes of Sally Ride, who kept her lesbianism a secret, perhaps because that wasn't how she wanted to be remembered. So Sally Ride was a lesbian, so already she's not an example of somebody who's being made into somewhere in the middle of the gender spectrum or whatever. She was just a lesbian woman. Yes, she, the first American female astronaut, did keep her lesbianism close to the chest. She didn't talk about that. I actually want to read this bit of an article by Slate because I think it's a bit interesting. Tam, Sally's long-term partner, said, Sally didn't want to be defined by the lesbian gay label just as she didn't want to be defined by a gender label. We didn't like categories, didn't want to define ourselves by our sexuality. In the end, Tam turned things around. With Sally in her final days, the two women started to plan a celebration of her life, an event for after that took their minds off now. Sally was dying of pancreatic cancer. But Tam saw the disconnect and asked Sally how she, Tam, should identify herself at the party. Sally considered the question and then said, "I want you to decide. Whatever you say, how much you want to say, is fine with me." Later she added, "Being open about us might be very hard on NASA and the astronaut corps, but I'm okay with that. Whatever you think is right is fine with me." So I find that very touching, honestly. Something about it moves me. And it certainly shows that while Sally didn't want to define herself based upon her lesbianism, there was also politics at play here, right? She was worried about the impact on NASA. She was worried about, the social world and how people might react. So I don't think we can just come to this hard conclusion that we know exactly why Sally kept her lesbianism a secret for so long. I don't think it's obvious anyway. And look, we could probably talk about this question all day. It's an interesting question. But at the end of the day, whatever you want to say about Sally, she indeed was a lesbian. She's not an example of somebody who were turning gay for the sake of American education. Also, American education isn't outing her. Her family outed her. People after she died talked about it. This isn't a secret. She's a lesbian. Shrier continues, "She seems to have considered being the first woman in space a little more important. Other giants of history are similarly vulnerable to a baptism of the dead. The chance to reemerge as non-binary, genderqueer, or trans. Fucking who?" Shrier finishes up this microscopic section writing, "While all this sexual identity politics marches through the front door, a large-scale robbery is taking place. The theft of women's achievement. The more incredible a woman is, the more barriers she busts through, the more gender non-conforming she is deemed to be. In this perverse schema, by definition, the more amazing a woman is, the less she counts as a woman. What, like, did nobody, editing this book, writing this book, feel indebted to giving one single fucking example? They didn't even bother? Schreier just feels comfortable typing all this out, her little polemic about LGBTQ education, without giving one single example of the women whose achievements are being denied. This passage of the book alone is enough to not take anything Schreier has ever said seriously. It's a joke. Why is it like that?